Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Thursday. It's time for Art Fight Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Nolan. I'm here with my co-host, Brian Siskind. Brian, I've got my mohawk all like just pulled back like this. I can almost do a mohawk with a man bun at this point in my coronavirus journey.
This is an indication that you perhaps have been watching too much MMA.
This is called Lonely Ronin.
Well, I'm sporting this
trademark
cool
Joe
brace.
Lonely Ronin.
I have this thing called skier's thumb.
Oh shit! But you don't actually ski though.
No, I haven't in a long time. It's always nice when you injure yourself and it's like, well, people that are actually doing things hurt themselves in this way.
Is this an old injury that's just bothering you from too much like music making?
You know, Joe, I'm just so glad you asked. Can I just tell you, like, thank you for asking. And I'd like to spend an insane amount of time talking about this, but basically, no, it's one of those things where catching a basketball too many times where like it hits here, right?
Jammed.
I think that I had torn something a long time ago. This is like 10, 15 years ago. And I think it healed back wrong. And then I was doing some old man something or other and just snapped it and it popped and then it hurt like hell. It's one of those things where I might have fixed it. And it's just like I'm in recovery now for something that I, way better than surgery, right?
Just luckily, you had that handy dandy thing that you got wrapped all over your hand, like you're about to go into like a Muay Thai training mode.
But I want to remind people. That we do have the live chat open. I was just explaining to everybody that like we started doing this live video because it was just a means to tape it after we weren't doing it in the same room anymore for the audio podcast. This is all kind of new to us, still. But we're getting into it now pretty strong with the video. And so that means that our live chat is open on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, and all the places. So feel free to jump in, especially as we get into things like rules and regulations or open scoring or what it's like to be an Irishman.
All those things that we're going to talk about with our guest today. We're here with Seán Sheehan from Severe MMA. Seán, we're so glad to have you here with us.
All right, lads. Thanks very much for having me. I'm looking forward to it. I actually put out a thing a while back. Is like after there was one of the big like judging decisions and everyone was giving out about it. I was like, right, I'm willing now and open to go on anyone's podcast. And loads of people replied like, oh yeah, dude, like I'm going to get you on and all. And I believe this is the first one in about 2 months. Like so. Great. I know we're going to talk a little bit about judging, but one of the big frustrations for me, and I know people that care about judging, is like people care about judging for like one night. And there's a bad decision, and then they stop caring for 7 months, and then they care for another night, and there's another bad decision. It's that's a kind of thing with me. So
I think it's hilarious because Brian and I I'll just go with this flow, and then at some point maybe we'll backtrack and I'll explain a little bit more about how we got connected. But suffice to say, you made a great video on your YouTube channel about how the rules actually work in MMA and kind of highlighted all the ways that people get it wrong all the time. That's gotten the attention of lots of people, including myself. We talked a few weeks ago. We got you on the show today to talk about this and other things, of course. But one of the things that I find to be so hilarious about it is that, like you say, is that that phenomenon of like MMA memory and the way that like the audience can get so worked up about something, and then boom, like the next day it's a tattoo or something, and now that's got all the oxygen.
I suppose it's the same in any walk of life, really. Like people, I'm sure like I'll watch the Olympics if it's on next year or maybe the year after or something, and I'd be like, I'm a figure skating expert for one day or something. But like there's parts of MMA that are like that as well, and I'm sure I'm like that with parts of MMA as well. But yeah, that's a very frustrating thing. I know for judges, having spoken to a lot of judges over the last few years, and it's MMA judging is like probably the most misunderstood part of the sport, I suppose, and the most like for fighters, okay, if we watch a fight and we don't really, for MMA fans anyway, like maybe we don't understand how to throw a jab properly. We can see a jab, we don't understand how to throw a front kick properly. But we know what a good one looks like. We know what a bad one looks like, and there's a tendency to be like a little bit respectful of the fighters because they have names and they have faces and we can see them, we know who they are. With judges is kind of opposite. For a lot of the time they're kind of nameless, faceless people and we completely don't understand what they are doing or the rules in which they are under.
Yeah.
So it's coming from all angles with them, really.
interesting. That's like they're rather like the MMA gods who seem to rule over us with such absurd ferocity and destroy so many good things and make us fall for things so often. And sometimes it feels that way with the judges because of that anonymity. I was gonna also say that, like, some of these people who for whatever reason, the fact that they're engaging with this idea about judging and the importance of judging, which of course it actually on some level means everything if you don't knock somebody out, but another part of it I think that's kept us involved was that Brian and I a few months ago, I don't even remember when this happened, Brian, because I still am like I still have like a heartache about it. It still hurts me to think about it, so I kind of put it away, but we tried to do like an additional little chapter connected to the podcast that was called Versus, where we would actually sort of talk through almost like a role-playing game, like 3 rounds between a fighter and an artist of our choosing. And we would just pair these people up and have them fight. But when we did that, we had to, at least the way we went about it was, well, we need to deep dive into the rule set so that we can figure out how to model this weird game that we're going to talk our way through every one of these episodes. It turns out, Sean, no one cares about those episodes. And we had to quit doing those episodes because it was just too painful, frankly. But we dove into those rules, and still, when I came to your video, not only is it hilarious, but it also, to me, there was things that you pointed out that were very specific that I thought were areas that even after we'd taken that deep dive, I think I was like, I've never really thought of it this clearly. Okay. And there's one like specific thing I'd like to talk about, but there's this whole idea that there's these like 3 things. So why don't you tell us what they are? The 3 things that we're supposed to be judging. And the thing I think is interesting about this is that the first thing is the thing that matters, and then you described it as a plan B. Okay. Or maybe they described it as a plan B, but the way that you made that clear was like, only if, this first thing doesn't happen, do you even begin to think about this second thing? And only if neither of those things have happened, do you even go to the third thing? And I think most of us, and I know I do it, I sort of am like, I don't know about that, but this is there, so therefore that guy got it, and it's sort of like, I feel like it gives you a license to be lazy if you don't really strictly make yourself follow that rule as you're going through these criteria. But why don't you take us into it, because you're the expert and that's why you're here today.
Well, I don't know if I'm an expert or anything.
You're better than we are.
Well, for a lot of people, when we are, but like,
you're a spokesman anyway. I feel like you're very knowledgeable.
I'm trying to be.
You're one person that has sincerely tried to really actually understand all of it. Like that means something, right? Because most people that have an opinion have not really, right?
Including me.
Yeah. Well, like I suppose the order you're talking about, I'm looking at I have it up in my second screen here in front of me. Okay. And in the very first sentence, last 2 words are specific order, right? So we talk about the judging. You mentioned the 3 parts of it there. So it's the first part is effective striking and grappling, choking someone, punching someone. The second part of it is effective aggressiveness. So it's like, attempting to land strikes or going to be aggressive, like running at someone. And the third part is octagon control, maybe pushing someone back, controlling them, right? So those are the 3 parts. If the first one is even, if grappling and striking are even, you go to the second one. If the aggressiveness is even, both people are aggressive in equal measure, you go to octagon control. If someone's pushing them back, then they'll win the round. If that's equal, it's a 10-10 round. So it's simple as that. Now, to get from part A, the effective striking, grappling, to part B. We'll just talk about that for a second. To get from there to there has to be less than 1 punch of a difference between the 2 people, right? So if you think about the first round between Israel Adesanya and Yoel Romero, it's a perfect round for it. That whole round, nothing happened in the whole round apart from 1 punch, right? 1 punch landed. If you go back and watch the rounds, one of the worst rounds in MMA history, Yoel Romero landed 1 punch. And Yoel Romero won that round 10-9 because of that 1 punch. So we have effective grappling and striking, and we stop there. We don't look at effective aggressiveness. We don't look at octagon control. Once that 1 extra punch is landed, that is it. And that to me is the crux of judging and the crux of the misunderstanding of judging. We see John Jones tweeting out every time there's a fight, he won via octagon control. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's just not a thing anymore. I'm looking at the criteria here again. And in it says like it's the result of their actions is what the round is based on, and it's extremely rare that we move from criterion A to B to C. C almost doesn't exist. B very, very rare as well. And I suppose we can talk about the intricacies of it as well. But that to me is like the very base of it. And when I was kind of explaining that, it kind of changed it a little bit for me. So all you need is one extra punch, one grappling maneuver that's immediately effective over the other person. So I suppose, you know, it's tougher to do that when it's around with, you know, back and forth. But when a perfect round like Adesanya versus Romero, that one punch of a difference is all it takes.
Wow. It's almost like the second and third sort of metrics there would be basically like, did someone try or did they run or not? It's just, but it seems like if I can understand, are you kind of articulating that essentially, since part of this is sort of, you either have to look at it as a formula or a rubric, but you can't look at it as both. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah.
Like an if then versus like a just, plotting points on a
the example I give.
Yeah.
I don't know if people, maybe a lot of American viewers wouldn't understand it, but the Premier League table, right? If Manchester United and Liverpool are the top two teams, right, and they both finish on 90 points for the year, okay? Who wins the league? Who wins the league? Right, so we go to who scored the most goals or who has the better goal difference. What if that's equal? What if they both have 50 of a goal difference? Well, then we go down to who won in a head-to-head between Man United and Liverpool, and look, Man United beat Liverpool twice, Man United win the league. So that's it. But if Man United finish on 91 points and Liverpool finish on 90 points, then we don't have to go to the other two. Man United win the league because they're 1 point ahead. That's the kind of the difference here. Like all of those things are still rules, but they're only rules if the other ones don't count. Like there's overtime in American sports. When do you go to overtime? When it's a draw. Right. You know, you don't go to overtime if one team is 20 and the other team is 15. You know, it doesn't happen. So that's the rules in that game. It's the same in MMA. MMA have these rules where if you land more effective striking, more effective grappling, that's what wins you the round. It doesn't matter where the fight is fought. It doesn't matter who is pushing forward or who's going backwards. It's the effectiveness of your strikes and your grappling.
And I think it's really it's fascinating, you know, and it gets complicated when you're in the midst of watching it. Of course, it's not easy to judge that, but once you really get it clear, to me, once I really got it clear in my head that like this isn't sort of a loose, that, you know, like I said, I think on some level you're aware of the fact that there's this sort of hierarchy of you know, whatever importance, you know, like this, if not, then this, you know, but like I said, I think a lot of the problem comes because you sort of get lazy about the first one. You sort of say, man, I don't know, that was really close. And then immediately it's like, so-and-so, you know, had, what's the second? Well, the second one is what now? The second one is
effective aggressiveness.
Effective aggressiveness. Yeah. So immediately you might say, oh, this guy was more aggressive, so he got it. And you might be right. You might be able to make that calculation. But I really feel like when you emphasize that, you know, it only if somebody did not actually win that first category. And like, it's, you know, your video really makes it clear that it's like, that's almost impossible that someone didn't score one more effective shot than the other one. You know what I mean? It's almost impossible. Or somebody didn't, you know, get close to a submission, you know what I mean? Or somebody didn't, you know, really, you know, control someone in a clinch and land a few blows, you know, all these different ways that someone might have gotten just a little bit better than the other guy or the other lady. You know, it's like, chances are, you know, it really comes down to, you didn't see it, you know, and it wasn't as close as you know, talked your way to Brian through the round. You know what I mean? You missed a couple things, you know what I mean?
Well, let me throw something in there, which is just like, I feel like, and for those that are not, you know, hardcore MMA fans in our listening pool, that are mostly creatives and weirdos and artists,
dare they?
You know, part of this is, I think that anyone should understand at best, what we have in terms of the scoring system is something that was sort of retrofitted from another sport in haste because of the burgeoning, the quick explosion of MMA. They just basically had to get it sanctioned and commissioned, and so all those mechanisms and bodies were there to sort of work with, and so they're kind of going that way. But I feel like it's a little bit different, perhaps, than a lot of other sports. So there is this subjectivity. There is the what'd you see, what'd you not see, what are your interests, who do you work for, whatever, like all the strange sort of conditions that get into this. But I guess how much of this do you think is just attributed to just having sort of a crude implementation of a sort of, it's like taking engine parts out of a car and being like, I don't know, this will probably work in mine. It's not the same car. And so I feel like there's always this kind of crudeness to the application of the must system to MMA to begin with. And then secondly, I want to follow up with just what are your thoughts on technology seemingly inevitably at some point going to sort of take over, I think, in some way, or be an implement or an assistance or something. I mean, I understand we're way behind. We don't even really, there's very few sort of instant replays or things like that in play, but still, I mean, it's coming, it's happening. So I guess I was just curious about sort of taking a step back and just sort of going, okay, for the uninitiated, it's kind of weird fighting refereeing and rules application and the subjectivity of it all. Very strange. So we're always dying to have some sort of something to hold on to, that some sort of certainty or something. So how much of it do you attribute to sort of the nature of just judging as it applies to MMA, just because that's what we got to do?
Just the second part quickly. I hate technology with an absolute passion, and I think it has a very little play in sports anyway, and not outside of sports, but I hate technology in sports. Like we can't forget that this is a sport too, and other sports as well. Like I'm a big soccer fan, and we've brought in VAR, and it's ruined the game. I hate it with a passion. Now it's different in some sports, especially in American sports, the NFL. It's a very stop-start sport, so it's way more applicable there. But I think in MMA, if you stop the fight for 10 seconds, it could change the whole fight. So that's, to me, is a very odd thing. But let me circle back to the 10-point must system. I think at the start, the points you made there were completely correct. I think it was kind of retrofitted to it, and the system which we had just didn't really work for MMA. It was a muddled together system which improved over the years, and we found ways of fighting with it. But I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, the criteria was adjusted and they changed it, and a new criteria was written. The one I can send the link out. It's in my video up on YouTube. It's in the description there. It's 3 pages and I think 4 lines long. That's all it is. So if you have a spare 5 minutes, you'll be able to read it. That criteria is what was written 3 or 4 years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago, and that's completely changed it to me. It's completely made judging, and it's completely made the application of the rule set which we have more understandable for one, and more applicable for the judges themselves. Anyone listening to this, my next sentence is probably going to anger them, but judging has never ever been as good as it is right now. It's never been as consistent. It's absolutely fantastic. Now we have some terrible judging decisions, or not. The example recently, Paul Felder, Rafael dos Anjos. Who won that fight? Do people remember who won that fight?
Dos Anjos.
Yeah. So one judge had it wrong. The reason you have 3 judges is because 2 of them get it right and 1 of them get it wrong. And sometimes a judge isn't good. Sometimes we have a bad judge. Sometimes a judge has a bad night. That's going to happen. That's why we have 3 judges. So 2 of them judges got it absolutely right, and we got the right result out of that. If the worst complaint we can have this year is the right fighter won, I think we're going well. And if you look
scandal.
Well, my kind of point is, right, that's what happens. We see someone we think is robbed, and we get mad about that. But what about the other 8 fights on that night? And what about the 9 fights the week before? And what about the 120 UFC fights that happened in the last month? It seems that's something that we just kind of don't look at. And I think the criteria, the way it's written now, is to make MMA, and it says it in the criteria, it's to make MMA a more attacking sport, and more offensive sport. And that's what MMA is built on. It's built on entertainment. It's built on being attacking. So some people will probably argue and probably make the point to me, they're taking wrestling out of the game. They're not making it as applicable in MMA as it once was. Good. We want MMA to be exciting. We want it to be better. And it's not like they're taking wrestling out of MMA. If you use your wrestling correctly, you can have absolutely effective offense, whether it's grappling or
there's a guy named Khabib who will tell you all about it.
Indeed. So or even like you go back to Tito Ortiz years ago, taking guys down, absolutely destroying them. Like that scores as much or more as a guy on the feet doing the same thing. So I think the reapplication of the criteria, the rewritten criteria, has changed the 10-point must system and how good it is for MMA. But there's
Right.
always one thing, and I might be very positive about judging here. There's always one thing that's an issue with judging, and it's always going to be an issue with judging. If I hit you once and you hit me back once, who hit harder? That is the crux of judging.
Yeah,
that is the crux of it. The judges sit there to judge. You know, Ben Cartledge, the judge who was judged out in Fight Island, judge UFC, Bellator title fights, always tells me judging is a verb as well. You know, you're sitting there to judge. You judge what is more effective, and that is always going to be an issue. Like, I could be sitting on one side of the cage and the fight could be happening right in front of me, and I see how hard Khabib hits Dustin Poirier, and I think Khabib wins the round because of that punch. But the guy on the other side of it might have had his view knocked off a little bit, mightn't have seen it, mightn't have even seen the punch land, and said, no, I think Poirier was a little bit ahead in it, I'm going to give it to him. That's the one issue with judging, especially in close rounds. But for me, and the last point I'll make on Tropic, if you can understand why a judge gave a round a certain way, I think that's okay. If I think Khabib won this round 10-9 and you think Poirier won a 10-9 and it's very close and we can both understand, that's the best we can hope for. We will never, ever, ever, ever get everyone agreeing under any criteria. And if we take that out of our heads for a second and then go from that point, that's where we need to go from, I think.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And I think there's something about that human element of, like, you know, that you almost don't want to turn to the computer. I mean, I like the CompuBox numbers and all those things to look back at things and understand, you know, a certain, you know, whatever breakdown on the actual activity of the fight or whatever. But when it comes to the judging and stuff, I agree. It's like, that's close enough for me. It doesn't have to be closer than that. And then, you know, we get rematches of great fights. Hell, bring it on. You know what I mean? What's the problem? So the thing I want to really quick point out too is that we were, you know, shouting out the show right before we got started, and we've got some people in the live chat. Where's the tweets too says, you know very little about fighting, and I assume he's talking to me. And I want to also say that
there we go. We'll put that up. We'll put that up for you guys. There you go.
S Denny, and also there's a Sean Denny, there's an S Denny 9. I don't know if that's the same person.
It is the same guy. I know he's a big KSW fan. Yeah. So.
Oh, can you see these chats?
I can see him. Yeah, I can see him.
Okay. Okay. Cool. I love that he brings up your KSW poster, and I was going to mention that as well. So kudos.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a nice one. As Shani, that question up there, what's more troublesome, significant strike or ground control time? I think significant strikes is way worse, because significant strikes are the most pointless stat you could ever give by the criteria. You could hit me 50 times in a round and I could knock you down once, and it'd be 100 significant strikes to 1 and I'd win the round. That's a fact as the criteria is written. So showing significant strikes is absolutely pointless. It's the effectiveness of those significant strikes is what matters as written in the criteria. So there you go. Just answer that one.
Another thing I love, man, I really dig the way your personality now, but even on the video, you know, I think sometimes people, you know, people approach the way they do their YouTube videos and stuff differently. And I think that one of the things beyond just the information and like the specificity of what you were talking about in the video, one of the other things I really liked, man, was the way that you kept on coming back, and you're like, but you can understand this because you can read it, because it's written down. It's there in the criteria. It's there in the book. You know,
I was very mad that day.
Hammering the primary documents, you know, but you did it in such a way that was just really funny. Like as much of a harangue as that video is, it really somehow doesn't come off as pedantic. And you really should be commended for that, because it's a masterful job of like teaching without talking down to people. You know, it's really, really a great video.
It was on no way on purpose at all. It was the day after, I think, John Jones, Dominic Reyes, I think, and I was so mad that I just got on. I'm like, I can't take this anymore. I just have to do, and that was genuine madness. Like
in the criteria.
I tend to be, if anyone listens to the main podcast, I tend to be kind of more relaxed and kind of laid back, and you know, the one or two rants out of me, but I get so frustrated because the information is there, and like it's not just fans, or it's not just people on Twitter. It's like world championship fighters. Daniel Cormier hasn't a clue about the criteria. He's never read it. Joe Rogan never read it. Some of the best journalists in the world have never read the criteria, have no idea. Michael Bisping absolutely never read it. It's just, like, and the thing about it is, I know John Gooden, he's watched the video I put up and he's read the criteria, and you see him on one of the cards, well, not so recently, I suppose, maybe 2 months ago. He pointed out something from the criteria to Michael Bisping, and Bisping talked him down. He's like, no, that's not how it works. And that's the frustrating part to me, because I'm listening at this and I'm like, I need to just like leave the room for a second, because I'm getting so incredulously mad. Because it's not just Din getting it wrong, it's telling all the people at home to get it wrong, and it's telling them the wrong thing, which they didn't think is right, and it just causes an extra stress for me.
Well, you know, that reminds me of kind of a situation we have here right now, where you have people that should know the actualities of what's going on and be speaking down, you know, or out to the masses with a little bit more clarity. And then there's a negative impact when you spread information or whatever that's not exactly real. And so it is crazy. It's almost like traffic laws or something, where it almost depends on who you are as a person as to how you like that's, I mean, yes, technically that's illegal, you know, like there's all this subjectivity, I think, to any of these sort of these lines, you know. But I think that one of the things that I look at it as is sort of like there's this sort of collective truth that everybody's trying to get at. The fighters are trying to get at it from the perspective of my skills versus your skills, styles, competing, you know, which will prevail, that sort of sentiment. And then you take another step out and it's everybody's competing in some way, but also everybody's sort of striving to get some sort of common truth, and everybody's got a role in sort of establishing that. And it's inevitable that it's got to go through so many different sort of prisms or perceptions, or where you're sitting, or any number of things, to where it's going to be ultimately a collection of, you know, like you're saying, Joe, like you can't be data driven fully, right? You have to be data informed and leave some room for yourself to kind of not be freely wildly interpretive, but just to judge, into, like Sean said. Yeah, like the active nature of soaking in context and sorting it out and deriving some sort of conclusion from it. It's an elusive thing. And then you've got like different commissions, you got different judges, you got all the different things. So it is a wild ride. I mean, I guess I wonder.
It's a wild ride, kids.
You know, well, I mean, but here's the thing: is like you even think about, you know, UFC rankings, or I mean, anything where they try to anything where something is codified, its reasons or its constitution are usually still interpretive. The Bible is interpretive. I mean, like even I don't know. So like,
how dare you?
Right? I know. So, so we have this human nature, I think, sort of thing of like, okay, I mean, I understand that it says that, but I've got to sort of think about it and through my lens or whatever. But I guess I just wonder, you know, in terms of that collective truth and that sort of gathering, you know, what's the fate of it? I mean, do you think that, you know, you say it's, you know, better than it's ever been, but at the same time, I'm not saying I mean, I get it, right? It's kind of like people saying these times are the worst times ever, but it's like, yeah, but you also have food and water, and there's not a famine, and calm down, right where you are. So, but in terms of like best judging ever, I mean, with Reyes, I mean, no, people still say like, well, I mean, he won that fight, Jones lost. I mean, so there's also just sort of like, there's the codified meritocracy versus the interpretive, or I know what really happened meritocracy. So I find it interesting just how we're always trying to map this thing out to kind of collect this truth, but they're really it's almost post-truth. So it takes something absolute sometimes, but I wonder where it's going to go. Like, you know, what do you think?
Look, I think there are absolutes in MMA judging, you know, and I don't know. I have a terrible memory for fights, but if you remember the first round of Davison Figueiredo versus Joseph Benavidez, it almost got to the end. I know I talked about it, but let's say that fight got to the end of the round. Everyone on planet Earth is going to score that for Figueiredo. He knocked him down like 3 times. He almost choked him unconscious. He did in the end. Let's say he didn't. Benavidez barely landed a punch in him, right? Everyone, there's a unified truth there. Everybody knows that he won that fight. Okay, or that round. Okay, you could say maybe, is it a 10-8? Is it a 10-7? Is it a 10-9? Probably everyone would agree it's not a 10-9 as well. So you're then going for 10-8, 10-7. The problem is not that round. The problem is the round that are very, very close. And we actually don't, if we strive for a unified truth when we're talking about MMA judging, we're already finished. It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. It can't happen because of MMA judging is a verb where the judges are sent there. And the reason as well, you know, I talk about good judges, and I don't know what I said in the podcast or what I said in the tweet recently. they need to bring in the best judges in the world for the biggest fights, because there aren't that many great judges, and simply because there can't be that many great judges, because it's a very, very tough job, and you have to be a very, very specific person to be very, very good at it, and you also have to be willing to do it for no money and no thanks, and to be hated for doing your job right. Honestly, it's the most thankless job.
Sean, write up that job posting for us. We're gonna get some people who are interested.
Exactly.
Write that up word for word, and we'll see how effective that is in getting some people to show up for the job of being a judge.
The most idiotic thing. Argument that people make. Let's get ex-fighters to judge. I was talking to the Kansas commissioner last night, and he told me $250 they get paid to judge in Kansas. Let me see an ex-fighter who's going to go and get abused all over the place for getting decisions wrong for $250, and you might get a show every 2 months.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. It's a thankless job, and it has to be. No, it's like covering MMA. Really. It has to be a passion for you. You have to love it. You have to be willing to want to do it.
Yeah.
It's not a thing people come into to get money or anything like that. And there's very few people like that. There's some absolutely excellent people. Some in America, some in I think the UK, especially. I think with Mark Goddard and Ben Cartledge and David Leatherby and the other guys coming through. Darryl Ransom, this new judge who has judged in Cage Warriors and KSW and all the big shows around here, and I think only in Fight Island recently he got his first UFC gig. This guy has been doing it. He went from like a fan of MMA to asking Ben Cartledge could he judge, how does he get through it, and he did local shows and fucking pool halls in Nottingham in England, and he worked his way up, got to Cage Warriors. Cage Warriors is very, very similar like to the UFC, to set up the cage and everything like that. Build your way up to get to the very top. Those are the sort of people we need.
Pool hall in Nottingham is one of my favorite Vogue singles. I wanted to that you made the perfect pivot over to talking about being in MMA media. Besides talking to you about the judging and this this video that you've become so well known for, and like that has people threatening to put you on their podcast, and I'm glad that we actually made it happen. But a lot of people who listen to the podcast are maybe they're fans of MMA, maybe they're not even fans of MMA, maybe they're not even into sports, but they're artists of some kind, painters or dancers or the other kinds of guests that we have on the show. Sometimes there's an overlap, and that's another thing we've discovered. But no matter what, one of the things that everybody seems to have in common is that everybody's got some kind of a practice that they've built and a process they've created. And I would just like to hear a little bit about your own story about how did you fall in love with MMA, and why did you want to get to the point of actually being a voice in the culture? And, how have you done that? Whatever you want to talk about regarding all that stuff.
Yeah, I suppose I never wanted to be a voice in the culture.
You're a voice in the culture, Sean.
No, I didn't. I really didn't want to. I started watching MMA when I was in college around 2006, I think, 2007 maybe. So, geez, that's 14 years ago now. A friend of mine just didn't have. We had a cheap chorus box in our house, which is like an old Irish thing with 15 channels instead of the normal 4 channels. And we had the one channel with the Ultimate Fighter on, and my friend used to come up every week and make us watch it. And I was like, what is that terrible shit? And I eventually kind of got into it, and then I was away for a summer by myself working, and then I was just went back and watched all old Forrest Griffin and Chris Lieben and all those fights. And that's kind of how I got into it. And then I started becoming fans of podcasts and things like that. And I suppose kind of getting into, I wouldn't call myself a journalist, but into the media side of it, I suppose, or the talking head side of it, was through, I'm sure you know Steffi Haynes over in Bloody Elbow. She used to run a podcast called, what was it called? Tap Out Podcast, and it changed its names throughout, and she's still doing it now at the moment, or a new guise of it anyway. And I used to be in there, and I used to kind of run competitions for her in the chat of that podcast. And I kind of built up, there used to be people that Michael Bisping would be in the chat, and people from all around, Tommy Toehold before he started doing his cartoons, and loads of people like that. So it was before the madness of MMA online, I suppose, kind of took off, and where everyone kind of knew everyone. I remember Uncle Creepy Ian McCall used to be in there kind of before he got to the UFC, and trying to get people to get him to the UFC and things. So it's I kind of started off there, and I made kind of friends, I suppose, through Twitter and online there in the MMA sphere, and with a lot of the journalists and things as well. So this guy, Dan Rose, who owned a website called HOV MMA, so it's History of Violence. asked me one time that I want to write for him. Because I said, like, I want to put up my picks. So I just wanted to keep track of my picks for the year. And I was like, I was asking in the chat, should I do a blog? And he was like, oh, let's do it on my website. And you can write a bit of an article, go with it if you want. I was like, okay, fine. And I did that for maybe a couple of years. And then Severe MMA, Graham runs Severe MMA, and he saw me did an article. I think it was on Conor McGregor, maybe a little bit before Conor McGregor got to the UFC. Maybe I think it was the year before Conor McGregor at the UFC. I'd been writing for a couple of years. And then he asked me to write for Severe MMA. And then I started doing the podcast, and then one thing led to another, and now I've kind of the madness of I do today. So it's kind of built up and built up. I think it was 6 years since I started the podcast, and that's really when kind of things picked up. Started the Patreon and different things like that. So
what was it that? Is this something that's natural to you, that you sort of are magnetized to regulatory considerations of things? Is this something that transposes to other areas of your life, or is it just something where like you got turned on to MMA, and then after you got over the sort of initial wash of like, what am I doing watching this? Am I okay as a person? Right? We all have that moment, right? Early on, and then you realize like, no, this is cool, and then
go with it.
I guess I'm go with it. But yeah, so I guess I'm just curious if I don't know, you follow like
I've thought about that before, and I think a lot of things with MMA, like I did maths and economics in college, and I hated the economics. I only did it. I don't know why I did it, but I've always had a very mathematical brain. You know, I've always kind of had, saw things in it. It's weird. I sound like fucking Rain Man or something, but like, in kind of, I've
penny round.
Exactly. But I've kind of put 10 and 8 together, and I get 18. That's always the way I've kind of looked at things. And I suppose even watching fights themselves, like, I don't know how to throw a punch, or I don't know how to take someone down, but over years and years of kind of watching it and understanding, if one guy throws, a left hook, the other guy's can come underneath it and get a takedown or something like that. It's just, I suppose, building those things up, putting them together, and then the outcome of it. That's kind of how I got into MMA more than anything. I was a fan of funny guys like, Rampage Jackson and Chael Sonnen and things like that. But what my love of it was that equation of what one person doing something and the other person doing something. What's the equation of the two of them things put together? That's why I kind of got into MMA, and that's why I love MMA. And I suppose the judging is a similar thing, like what fighter A does and what fighter B does. And are we 10-9? Are we 10-8? Are we 10-7? Are we 10-10? No, we're not 10-10. But that's the way my brain has always kind of worked, and that's what kind of always fascinates me. So
do you have a fight that because I mean, obviously you're a fan, but also you're a person that strives to be objective. So have you had a fight that comes to mind where when you watched it, you just felt it was just an absolute robbery or whatever, even through your lens and knowledge? And then still after realized that it was actually just your fandom that was sort of blinding you, or something to that effect, like where you just feel like, wow, how I feel like I'm so on top of this and I'm still getting it crazy wrong.
Not since I learned how the judging criteria works. Now, I'm sure at the start, of it, but like, that may sound like a glib answer, but like,
I love it. No, it's in the criteria, Sean.
But the answer is actually not to do with the criteria. The answer is to do with the answer I just gave you, because like, I have always watched MMA as kind of fighter B versus fighter A versus fighter B. And who I've never really been. I'm a fan of every fighter. Don't get me wrong, but I've never been a fan apart from Wonderboy. I love a bit of Wonderboy. I have a soft spot for Wonderboy, but nobody else. I've never really been like a big, huge fan. Like I always hope the Irish guys do well, because you like to see guys from your own country, and it benefit me. Let's not lie. I always kind of wanted them to do well, but I've never like. Oh, here's Ben Cartledge in the chat here, one of the best judges in the world. But it's that's kind of way I've always kind of looked at fights. And so recently, there was one fight actually recently. It was not that I got into it and I was like, oh, I got into the fight itself. So I wasn't watching it for who won the round. I was watching like, oh shit, this guy's getting knocked down or this guy's getting hurt or something like that. And then I thought at the end of the fight, oh, who won it? And I just didn't know. So I had to go back and I had to watch it and see who won. Actually reading this criteria has ruined fights for me, to be honest, because I can't watch them and enjoy them anymore. Very rarely happens. So it's no. So I don't really. I've never really done that, to be honest, and I haven't done it recently either. It's actually less so, I think, recently. So
I would agree that, like, for me, there's times where you know, I really enjoy keeping score, like when I'm watching fights, you know, and especially if it's like fighters that I don't know, like if I'm watching boxing or something, which I'm not as much up on, you know, the down card fights in a boxing match the way I would be in MMA nowadays. You know, I'm aware of the superstars and the up and comers pretty much in boxing, but when I watch fights that where I don't know the guys who are fighting, a lot of times I'll just invest in trying to keep score, because then that's fun and it can help you pay attention. But the thing of it is, like you say, is sometimes, you know, the fight can be so exciting that you can just get swept away, and all of a sudden, you know, the first round's over and you're like, I have no idea what just happened. It was just, I was just like lost in it, you know? So I think that's I think that's something that can happen to anybody. And I think that can, you know, I think it's really hard to have the objectivity that you have to keep when you're, you know, as a judge, especially, I think is very difficult, let alone as a gambler or something like that.
Oh yeah, that's the worst.
But I wanted to say, you shouted out Ben Cartledge, who's in our chat, and I'm glad that, you know, are paying attention to what people like you were talking about, and they know there's people out here who they care about this, and we want to talk about it and make sure that there's an amplifier on this conversation a little bit. And also too, you're really handing me a lot of nice segues today, even though I'm fumbling every one of them. But you just mentioned being an MMA journalist in Ireland, and, you know, when the Irish fighters do well, that's good for you. And you're the first actual like Irish journalist that we've spoken to. And I want to get a little bit of a sense of like, can you tell me what was it like to be in Ireland during this time where you have the rise of not only Conor McGregor, but SBG in general, and all the excitement that has gone on with that whole culture? And just, you know, what's that all like to be sort of in a space where suddenly a sport, where the best people in a sport suddenly are coming from this one small place?
It's so odd, because I remember a time where I used to have to explain to people what MMA was in Ireland, right? That doesn't happen anymore. You know, it's not a thing that exists anymore. If I meet like a cousin of mine who I haven't met in fucking 10 years or something, I'll be like, what are you doing? And someone's there and he says, oh, he's MMA, and he's like, oh, do you know Conor McGregor? You know, it's going to be that. It's not going to be what's MMA, what's UFC. It doesn't exist anymore. Like, I remember I used to show my friends fights. I used to always show them like Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen, the unbelievable comeback, the first fight, and try to get people into MMA. Like, I used to try to get people to talk to me about MMA. Now I try to get people to stop talking to me about MMA. That's how it's changed for me. Like, it's really a world of difference. Like, I used to know very few people. Like, when I started my early days of like being on Twitter and watching MMA shows and consuming MMA and watching, you know, whether it's Steffi or Ariel or reading Ben Folks' articles and things like that, it was all American people I used to know. It was all, you know, I didn't know anything about the Irish scene. And the problem, as I explained to you before, I'm away from Dublin as well. So I'm in Limerick. So I'm not near SPG. I didn't know Conor McGregor, you know, until maybe 2 fights for the UFC or these guys coming up. I know them all now, obviously, because it's very different. But the scene wasn't there. I remember one time I think I put it on the UG years ago. I was like, is there any Irish MMA sites? And I remember there was 2 at the time. Powerhouse MMA, who was run by Alan Murphy. He's actually works for KSW now, and Severe MMA, who I work for now. And they were kind of both just starting out, and they just both had started out, and I was working for another website. But like, you might have known I was Irish. I was writing things about Daniel Cormier and John Jones and Rampage Jackson, whoever it might be. I wasn't covering Irish MMA. Like, even when I went to Severe MMA, there was other guys kind of covering the Irish MMA scene, and I was more talking about the UFC and all that. But like, the Irish MMA scene now has kind of become more than just the Irish MMA scene, because all of the SBG fighters right now, if you make your debut and you're from SBG, you're in Bellator. So that immediately becomes a talking point. You're immediately more of a worldwide name or a worldwide promotional name anyway than you would have been if you were maybe in Clan Wars or even in Cage Warriors and things like that. And a lot of the guys coming through now in Cage Warriors, they're talking about being the next McGregor. You know, McGregor went through Cage Warriors. He came to the UFC. He became a champion. The likes of Paul Hughes, Ian Gary, and all those guys coming through now in Ireland, they're all being talked about in the same breath. It's not, can this guy be good? Can this guy be a professional? Can this guy get to the UFC? It's, can this guy be the next Conor McGregor and things like that? So it's a very different scene. We've gone from a scene where nobody knows anything about it even people like me who'd been covering the sport for maybe 3 years in the country didn't know the fighters in the country covering MMA. I remember my friend, actually, who got me into MMA. He told me about his friend who used to play GA with him, hurling and things. And he said he's gone to SPG and he's gone fighting. And his name is Brian Moore. He fights in Bellator at the moment. He fought AJ McKee a while back. And I was like, you know, he was like the first fighter I knew, and he maybe had only like one fight or a couple of amateur fights or something like that. So it was very rare, even for me, someone who was interested in MMA, to know anything about it. And now, like, my father knows about it, the person down the road, everyone knows about MMA because of obviously the explosion of Conor McGregor.
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
yeah, that's
you got to pay attention too, right? You got to, like, it's easy to. I saw Khabib's first fight in the UFC, and it was kind of like I didn't really know that I did until later.
Yeah,
was his debut in Nashville?
Yeah.
Oh, really? I think you told me that before. That's really crazy. Who did he fight? Do you remember?
Of course not. Of course not. but I do love what you're saying about like how sort of in Ireland it from 0 to 60, right? Like it went from just absolute kind of isolated little sort of world there and not really knowing who's coming up to, you know, now it's like the comparison level is meteoric now, totally unrealistic. Like whoever's coming up, how do they compare to Conor McGregor, or do they have this it factor, or, you know, whatever, you know? So you went from like, oh, we're just happy to have like fighters and, you know, representation or whatever. And it went straight to like, you know, where's the next? We need the next.
It's true. Kamal Shalarus as well was Khabib's debut. But yeah, like,
all right.
Did you remember that? Or did you look it up?
I looked it up. That's the problem. That's the problem as well. Like, I'm sure you know James Gallagher fighting in
yeah, I really liked him.
That's the issue with him. Like, even me, like watching James Gallagher coming through and stuff. I've been at events where he's fought. He's like a really good fighter, brilliant on the ground, brilliant jiu-jitsu.
Right.
But he has the tattoo like McGregor, you know, and he's, for an Irish person, he doesn't speak that much like McGregor, but I can understand how people outside of the country think he might speak. And he does a bit like that, but he's moved to where McGregor is from, and he's, you know, his accent is similar. And James Gallagher came on the scene for maybe people across the pond and other places, maybe when he was 19, 20. Like, he's an impressionable young guy with the most successful fighter in the history of the sport in the same gym alongside him. How's he not going to pick that up? But like, the criticism that he has had, you can criticize his fight and talk about everyone, but his criticism about him personally, that wouldn't have existed if Conor McGregor wasn't there. So there's a very, very big difference. And just on him as well, you go cover cards and you go interview people and stuff, and you see like them maybe behind the scenes a little bit. He's one of those guys where he's the most standout person I've ever seen. He's one of the nicest guys behind the scene you could meet. His family is always around him. His mother and father are always there. Just like a really good kind of guy behind the scenes, and takes care of his family and his people, and always has them, you know, you see him after the fights and he might sit down and might have a drink or two like his mother and father and go away. He's not going away with all his friends and messing and stuff. He, you know, he's one of those guys where you're kind of up close to him and you see him, and it's different. And like, I suppose, you know, he has brought some of that on himself, and I'm sure he wants it because it like makes him more famous and it makes him more out there. Yeah. But it can, and like, if you see the 2 points of that, it can be a benefit or it can be terrible for those fighters. And I think that's another big thing with maybe the McGregor thing that's changed a little bit. That's not as applicable in other places. Okay, some guys, like, you know, you have some gyms and you see Habib and Daniel Cormier, and before them Josh Koscheck and John Fitch and Cain Velasquez and all, and they kind of come up as a family like that. But it's very different in Ireland, where everyone is just below McGregor and like compared to him, and, you know, viewed in that guy. So it's an odd situation we find ourselves in here in Ireland. Yeah,
I really like James. I really, you know, that I understand that he has a lot of haters, and a lot of people just didn't like him early on because of the fact that he was adopting so much of the Conor energy, you know. And I totally got that, and it was annoying as hell. And he's, like you say, he's a very young guy. It like in a kid in a globally televised combat sport, you know what I mean? And it's like, and since that time, he's had losses, things have gone down. He's shown himself to have resilience and the possibility to grow and learn. And he's shown himself to be a much more mature young man. And I still get excited when I know I'm going to get to see a James Gallagher fight. So I really have enjoyed his journey the whole way through.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. Yeah, to see how it'll benefit him. Like, after his first loss to Ricky Bandejas, he went on I think it was the MMA hour at the time with Ariel, and he spoke really, really well, you know. And some people after a loss, and I hate to criticize people after a loss, but I'm not really criticizing, but I would rather give compliments to someone like James Gallagher, or even, you know, McGregor has been similar thing, or Dominic Cruz, when they lost the fight and they came out and they spoke after it. That takes like you know, a fortitude that mortals like us really can't even comprehend, to get like embarrassed in front of the world, and then the next day come out and go, look, you know, you swim with the sharks, you're going to get bitten. And that's, you know, that's what happened to all these people. And, you know, that's another thing that I kind of, I think a lot of people had respect for him, and maybe gained some respect for him after that as well. So it's, it'll be interesting to see how he gets on over the next while now.
Yeah, it's a cruel twist that you have to, you know, make yourself believe something, and you have to fully have total confidence that you're gonna win a fight, and then build yourself up to that. Then have the adrenaline of all that moment, and then the outcome is not what you wanted or desired, and to immediately be able to pivot to this point of just wisdom or objectivity on some level, to have perspective on it in any way. I find it very interesting that the fighter mind has to sort of ingratiate itself to something so kind of mythical until it's true. And then if it's not true, then, well, you know, there's ways to look at it where it's all right. You know, it's a very interesting dichotomy. There's not many other lives, I think, that have to work that way. That's a very, I mean, maybe in some of the artists and creatives that we talk to, I mean, you know, granted the consequences are different for your creative work. Like, oh, nobody liked my painting. Oh no, you know, but
I come out and talk after my gallery exhibition and say it's really my responsibility. I take full responsibility for the loss.
I think it'd be a great bit though to have you, Seán, like to have like I don't know if you probably haven't taken an art class or something, but I remember taking like a painting class. Maybe you did take an art class. I don't know. Have you ever done
I didn't. My niece is a really, really, really good artist, but
very cool.
So, yeah.
So like I just remember being in like a painting college class or whatever, and I don't paint. I just took it because it seemed like something to do. But they had these critiques, right, where everybody works on a project, and then you all put your paintings up on one sort of common wall or area, and then everybody kind of sits back and then, you know, offers this sort of critique of everything. And it's brutal because it's like a lot of times the work is not even fully finished or whatever. So, you know, I would love to see sort of your impressions of judgment as it comes to art, right? Or, you know, like what's the rubric, right, for what's good, Joe? I mean, do we even like when you're scoring a painting, Joe, how do you call it?
I trust the criteria, you know what I mean? And judging is a verb, so I actively compare it to the criteria. No, I mean, obviously you have to have criteria of some kind, but yeah, it's different. It's different when you're looking at art, I think, but I do think the judging is a verb part definitely applies, you know, because you have, like, I was thinking about this the other day, just because I was reading something that I didn't care for the way it was written, frankly. And it was one of these situations where you obviously have a critic talking about work with an agenda that they've brought to the table, not just a point of view they've brought to the table, but like an agenda that they're going to talk about. And you almost get the sense that you could put any other show in front of them and they would still find a way to talk about this other baggage they're bringing to their review of the show. And I mean, some people enjoy that kind of writing and some people like to write that way. And you could argue that it's valid on some level. To me, the opposite of that is the one where you have somebody who just basically copies the press release from the gallery, gets a quote from the curator and summarizes the art statement and then calls that like a review. Okay. That's like, you know, you're completely passive. And the other one, you're weirdly passive in a way too, because you're not really engaging with the thing in front of your eyes. So I think that's the key real thing, is to actually just engage with the thing itself, like the work itself, regardless of what the artist thinks it's about or says, regardless of what the gallery or the record label told you or the movie studio tweeted this morning. And then bring your thing to it. You know what I mean? Whatever that is, your perspective. Hopefully you have a point of view if you're wasting my time expecting me to read this. So there you go. And then there's different points of view. And I think, like when it comes to movie critics and stuff, we all find those voices that, generally this person writes about the things that I think are important, and they like the same things I like. So that I read this critic, or I, listen to this podcast or whatever.
Right. Or I just like watching this guy tear everything to shreds because he's always got an opinion. Like there's always that person or whatever. Right. Yeah.
Like Sean's Sean's judging video.
Shit.
It's on me.
Shit stirs.
It's a real,
Well, so I know it's getting pretty late at night over there for you, but I have just one more.
What time is it over there in Ireland right now?
It's 10 to 12, but I'm grand. I'm on Eastern time, to be honest. Pacific time even. I think I'm so bad at this stage, so I'm grand. I'm here as long as you want me to be here. I'm fine.
Okay.
Well, the last inquiry I sort of have, and then Joe, we can grill Seán for another hour if you want. But no, but my last thought was just with your experience and knowledge of all these things and your endless curiosity about it and respect for facts and logic.
Oh no, how's this question going to be?
Yeah, right. No, I guess, do you ever find yourself, like, it really struck me earlier when you said that, Daniel Cormier doesn't know, like, nobody knows the rules, and so when you think about people that are that accomplished that don't really play that closely to, or pay attention that much to sort of the rules or the judging criteria or whatever, I guess my question is, like, do you find yourself having an insight or an opinion about fighters in terms of, like, you've got fighters that play to the judges' point fighting approach, right? And then you have people that are wildly the opposite and don't care at all. And then you probably have a lot of people in the middle. But do you ever find yourself thinking, with the knowledge that you have, because you're one of the few people that actually has read everything, do you feel like if you were fighting, or when you watch another fighter, do you think, man, like they're making bad strategic decisions because of the way that the fight has played out and because of the balance of the scoring at this point? And why we haven't opened up open scoring, and I know that that's like a whole other like hour long thing, but I just wonder about, like, do you find yourself with your knowledge of it, like, sort of at odds with what's going on? Because if the fighter just knew that this was leaning this way, or this is a more intelligent way to kind of go about a better result sometimes, does that make sense?
100%. Like, there's loads of examples, but the one example is probably like the worst example I could make, because it's John Jones. We argue that he's the greatest fighter in the history of the sport, and you can't argue that. It's 100% Demetrius Johnson. Everyone who says it's John Jones is wrong. But anyway, we'll say it's John Jones. John Jones is, the way he fights over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years since the criteria has changed, has actually become less effective in scoring rounds than it has before. And look what has happened to John Jones in the last few fights. They've all been really close on the judges' scorecards. People think he's lost them, and that's because of the criteria changing, I think. And it's not just because of the criteria changing, but it's also because I mentioned him earlier on. Sorry, my hair is just all over the place here. We're still
go for it, man.
It looks great.
Like, John Jones is, you talk about point fighting to win fights. Point fighting is actually, with the written criteria we have at the moment, the worst thing you could do. Because if you point fight someone for 4 minutes and 55 seconds and then they knock you down with one strike, the other person's going to win the round. So that's kind of what John Jones is. I'm not saying he's completely a point fighter, because he can land big shots and do things as well. And what he's very good is he's very good at being defensive. He's a very good defensive fighter. So if he doesn't get hit, then his point fighting way of fighting is going to win him fights. Or I think point fighting is a bad example, using, but you know what I mean. So that as well is changing an awful lot. Like, Habib he started off his career, he was fighting guys like Kamal Shamarous and other guys, and he was very offensive because he was so dominant. Now, in his last few fights, he has been as well, but like, if you fight someone like the first round of the Conor McGregor fight, he took McGregor down and he laid on him for a long time in that fight, and he barely landed anything. Like, imagine if McGregor had landed like one shot before Habib did that, right? And Habib laid on him for 4.5 minutes. Under the criteria, Conor McGregor wins that round. Now, that's the issue with fighters like that, who are going to have to change their game. Now, all it might have taken for Habib to to win the round was to throw some shots or land a few elbows or maybe move and try to choke McGregor, go for an armbar or something like that. And I think that's what fighters, I've talked to judges and I've talked to fighters as well. And I actually know one judge who like spoke to a fighter because the fighter came up, or his trainer, I think, or his coach came up afterwards and asked him, like, not in a bad way, in a very respectful way. I was like, what do we need to do in the next fight to win this fight? And I watched that fighter in his next fight, and he did exactly what the judge told him. And it's not that the judge is giving him an insight into it or anything. Up on that screen, what's there, the criteria, all he has to do is read it and see what's there. And okay, there's an interpretation of it, obviously, as well. It takes more than just reading it. But I think if people read the criteria, if fighters read the criteria, if coaches read the criteria more, it would change the sport. And you know what it'd do? It'd make the sport a lot more exciting and a lot more offensive. So for the UFC, and this is like maybe a broader point, but for the UFC to kind of shy away from that and have their commentary team. Now, John Anik understands it. John Gooden, better than anyone on any commentary, maybe apart from John McCarthy. He may be the one except for that. If they were to like put out the criteria and tell us about it as the fights were going on and change the way we look at fights and the way people fight, we'd have a way better sport, because they're written to be more offensive and to be, you know, to make it a better sport. So that's the one thing. Like, I look at fighters sometimes and I see, like, I was watching, I did a rewatch today for OSP, right? And if you watch OSP fight, it's I don't know if this is the most PC thing in the world to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. He's the most one-handed fighter in MMA apart from Nick Newell. He only throws his left hand. He cannot throw his right hand. So if he fights in the orthodox position, he jabs because it's his left hand. If he fights in the southpaw position, he throws his left hand. But OSP is won loads of fights. He went 5 rounds with John Jones, you know. And how does he do that?
He's based here in Tennessee.
Yeah, he's a very effective fighter for the way he fights. And if you land a big knockdown against OSP, you could get jabbed up for the whole fight, and it doesn't matter because he knocks you down and he hurts you, and you know he's going to win that round. So there's different ways of fighting. Sometimes the more
the Darce choke is what he's going
to do. Indeed, you saw his last fight, yeah, or the Von Prue choke.
Oh,
yeah,
Von Prue, that's it. Yeah.
So like it's that's a great thing about MMA. There's so many different ways of fighting and so many great ways of fighting, but the best way to fight in 2020 is offensively, and that's a good thing. I think for the sport itself. But I don't like watching fighters and go, oh, this is the way you should do it, because I sound like an absolute dickhead. But just one last point on that. You spoke there about you were talking about art, and you were talking about like the process and the point of view you look from, right? When we're talking about fights and who should win the fight, we look at it from, you know, who's fighting. Conor McGregor's fighting Dustin Poirier coming up here. Oh, we look who landed the bigger shots, who landed the better shots and stuff like that. And we're looking at it from either Poirier's point of view, McGregor's point of view. We need to be looking at it from outside the cage. We need to be looking at it from the judge's point of view. And the process about talking about judging as well, and in a broader point again, it can't be on McGregor versus Poirier. It can't be on Habib versus, you know, Gaethje. It can't be on Jones versus Reyes. It has to be on every fight. It has to be on all the fights that happen all through the year. We can't blow up on one fight and say judging is rubbish or judging is good based on one fight. It has to be done over a long time. That process of looking at judging, you're not looking at the judging of one fight. I think you have to look at the process of overall judging, how things are judged, how judging has changed, and how specific judges judge fights and how good they are over a long time. So that's it.
Well, you may have seen this, like this, just to stick with this harangue on judging. Your friend Sean Denny wants to know when you will actually be a judge. I think you may have already answered this, but do you have do you want another thankless job to add to your resume?
I'd have to delete my Twitter if I wanted to be a judge. But I almost judged the fight last year. I was at Cage Warriors in Cork, and there was only 3 judges booked for that card, and one of them I think he got a flat tire on the way, and Ben Cartledge, who was in the chat earlier on, was judging, and he was like, we're in trouble here, we've only 2 judges. He's like, can you sit in and can you judge this fight if he doesn't show up?
Wow.
And I genuinely thought he was joking at the time. Then the guy, his name is Barry Oglesby, he's a good coach around here as well, and a good judge. He turned up and he was like, literally as the fighter was walking out, he got into the arena. So I would have been judging. But I've spoken to Ben about it before. I'd love to judge maybe an amateur fight or two. I wouldn't judge like professional fights and things like that. I just think I couldn't. I've given my opinion on every fighter in Ireland and the UK and America and stuff. So it'd be very unfair for me. Like, and I feel like my opinion is always fair and based on facts and stuff like that, but sometimes it isn't. I'm sure I get carried away sometimes, but I couldn't do it other than that. But do maybe amateur fighters or something like that to sit in the seat to see what it's like. I'd love to do that. I'd love to try it out, and I think it might give me that extra perspective as well, like talking to Ben. If anyone actually wants to listen, I did 2 podcasts with Ben Cartledge, and they're up on, I did 3, but 2 of them are up on Severe MMA. So we very rarely hear from judges, and I think that's another issue as well. And actually, the guy from Kansas I spoke to yesterday is doing like a symposium on judging, and it's going to be put up on YouTube, and everyone's going to be able to watch it. I think that's fantastic. And my conversations with Ben as well I think for me, are more important even than the watching the criteria, because you see it, like you see, you hear his voice, and you can see the human there and the work he has put into it and how seriously he takes it. And I think that's another part of judging that we need to think about as well. These are actually people who, and I talked about earlier on about the effort they put in and the love for it they have. They absolutely do. Like, they wouldn't be doing it if they didn't have that love and want to do it. So that's that's one thing I think people should keep in mind as well.
Well, I mean, obviously, you love what you do as well, and I love what Severe MMA has done. I love how you set up your Patreon. I think it's really smart and makes a lot of sense. I don't. I'm not a supporter right now, but I think that I'm in. So I just wanted to kind of I wanted to talk about it in person and say no, but so maybe we can turn the corner, wrap this up, so you're not staying up all night and all that. But maybe you can let people know anything you're doing that you're excited about that's coming up, or at the very least where they can find you and subscribe and support you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, Seán Sheehan BA, Severe MMA Pod on Twitter as well, and Severe MMA. So the podcast comes out every Sunday, and it's free on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all that. Just Severe MMA Podcast. Mm-hmm. I know we have a Patreon. You can sign up. We say it costs the price of a pint a month, so it's $5, or if you're over here, €5. And every Tuesday, I have a podcast, the Q&A. So you send in a question, I'll answer it. It's usually around 30 to 45 minutes. I have the rewatch. I go back and watch an old fight every Thursday. So you have at least those 2. I interview all the up-and-coming fighters in Ireland. I usually have a podcast every Wednesday as well on some certain amount of topics. Obviously, I have interviews with the likes of Ben Cartledge, and I interviewed Conor McGregor last year or this year even. It feels like 5 years ago, before his Donald Cerrone fight. And all the up-and-comers. Cage Warriors have 3 cards coming up here in, Jesus, it's 8 days time. Oh my God, I better start interviewing people. They're coming up soon, so we'll have lots of stuff for that. So, it's the European scene has kind of been torn apart a little bit over the last while, and there aren't that many people covering it as maybe seriously as they once were, but we're still kind of hanging in, and we have guys over in the UK as well covering it, and things like that. Harry Williams is a great guy. He's in Manchester doing it. Jake Smith is in Newcastle doing it. I'm sure Aaron Chalmers and all those guys coming through. And we have Steve and Sean as well over in the UK. So myself and Andy Stevenson and Graham and Ian O'Neill actually over in Canada as well doing it. So and my guy Padraig as well does videos and stuff for us. So we have a small but vibrant crew there, and severemma.com I suppose is the main place to go, and you'll find everything there.
Yeah, fantastic. Right on, man. Well, I appreciate it, man. I really appreciate you being on so quick. Like I said, this was just a few weeks ago that I discovered your video right in the middle of a fight night, and I think before the card was over, I was already in touch with you, and we were agreeing to do a podcast together. So I'm glad we were able to get you on so fast. That Poirier Conor fight is coming up. When that's at the end of January. Am I right about that?
23rd, I think. Yeah.
The 3rd of January.
23rd.
Oh, 23rd. Yeah. Well, maybe just let's put a pin in that, and maybe we can get you back. I mean, if you would have time, because I know you'll be really busy with covering stuff in Ireland, but maybe we can get you back on then, and we could sort of preview the fight together and get your perspective about that one, because that's going to be, I don't know, that's going to be an interesting fight. It's weird, like how the journey from the first fight till now, it's like 2 different fighters. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's also it's also who's going to win, right? Because you have Poirier, you have McGregor, and you have COVID.
Yeah, that's true too.
Having in Ireland, it's not so bad here. I think it was only 183 people tested positive this today. So
in in America, we're just piping it into people's houses.
Yeah. We're just,
I see that.
We're just doing
but
the opposite.
let's. I know we'll be in touch, Sean. So we'll keep in touch with you about that. And I
Okay.
really appreciate you coming on and talking about all this stuff with us. And I'm just really glad to add you to our group of like MMA media friends that we're shared these podcasts with, and we're really glad to have you on.
Yeah.
And I think you're also a great guest for our friends who don't know that much about the sport. I think this really gives them a lot of insight into how it actually works, and it's not just a human cockfighting match.
Well, at times.
Yeah. Well, and it's also something that you can be nerded out into the depths of rule sets and regulatory matters and all that. And honestly, it's all very interesting, even if you're not even really into the sport itself, just to see culturally what's happening and globally what's happening. I mean, it's a very interesting sort of microcosm to tune into and see, because generally we find that everything that's going on in the MMA sort of surround is essentially replicated in the broader culture or consciousness somewhere. So it's nice. I mean, sometimes it's terrible, like when you're talking about like Tito or things like that. I'm just like, oh goodness. But generally, it's a very cool thing to witness. So anyway, we really appreciate definitely you taking the time and staying up late, even though you say it's not late. And we'll see you on the other side of this. We're gonna run our little video to get out of here. Thanks everybody. Make sure that you do all the subscribing and the sharing and all the things. And we're always glad to be able to hang out with everybody. So until next time, take it easy. Thanks everybody.
Bye. Thanks for the questions.